You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Right now, if you were doing a little status check on climate change action, I think you'd be worried. We have world leaders running on anti-climate agendas, global trade is slowing down renewables, and carbon markets are spluttering. It's not looking good, or so it seems. Today, we put on our scrubs and check on the health of climate action. Hello and welcome to Climate Conversations. I'm Jack Board. Li Ling Tan is here. Hello to you. How's it going?
Hello, Jack Board. I am good, thank you. Running on fumes at the tail end of a crazy news week, though. How about you? How are you doing?
Running on fumes. I hope those fumes are not contributing to global warming, are they?
Gosh, I hope not.
Li Ling's personal emissions are just it's not helping the situation.
All right, moving on.
Okay, so vibe check right now, quick one from a journalist perspective. Do you kind of feel like we're at a low ebb in terms of sort of the focus on what is this slowly unfolding disaster that is climate change?
Absolutely. I feel like we're on such a low ebb that people don't really care anymore how low an ebb we're at. We were just talking about this, right? Like, who still cares?
Yeah, like let's spend more time talking about what people don't seem to care about. But it's important, right? We're talking about the future of everybody.
Well, there are people who care. Yeah, and we can get into more of, who actually cares later on in this podcast.
Yep, we will. Now, you've been lurking around Ecosperity Week in Singapore. You got out of the newsroom.
Yes, they let me out. They let me loose.
Yeah, they let you out. They let you
Free
loose.
reign. Here, Li Ling. Here's a recorder. Go.
Yeah, okay. So give us a little rundown of actually what is Ecosperity Week for people not in Singapore or not up to date with it, and what you were doing. How was the coffee?
Okay, so we were just talking about how people don't care. Well, these people do, and these people have deep pockets. And Ecosperity Week is basically an annual convening of government representatives, officials, investors interested in the green investment space to kind of come in and see what are some of these opportunities, what are some of the solutions people are looking at, governments are looking at, kind of, share some of their best practices and ideas, or maybe consult with people in the industry on how to move forward, on ways to move forward. It's really just a lot of the money coming together and exploring these investment opportunities. So I was there because I was looking for a bit of climate therapy, honestly. It's so depressing, right? And because I'm such a climate junkie. But I wanted to chase down a few people to get their thoughts on where we're at today. This, our own stock taking, I think we can call it that.
Interesting. Yeah. Always good to follow the money when you want to see what's really happening in this space. Okay, so we're going to hear some of your interviews a little bit later. But first, let's get cracking on the quiz. I'm taking us off on a different tangent, more onto what's been happening in the news in recent weeks. You have a scared look on your face, like, damn, have I been following all the news? Okay. While we talk about all these things in terms of finances, government decisions, investors, out there in the real world, our environment is being transformed, and typically for the worse. And pretty recently, we got new statistics about what percentage of the world's coral reef ecosystems have been affected by an ongoing global coral bleaching event. So this is where, of course, corals turn white. They slowly die. We should care about this too. Li Ling, can you tell me roughly what percentage of corals have been impacted?
We talked about this months ago, right? When you and I first started.
There's the new stats that came out in April.
And I can't imagine that much progress has been made. So I'm going to go with what? I can't remember the stats. I'm going to go. Do I guess now? Do you want me to guess now?
Yeah, you can guess at the end.
I'm going to go with it. Oh, okay. I'll guess at the end. All right.
Okay.
Keep you all in suspense.
Yeah. All right. Now for our main story this week, Li Ling, take us to Ecosperity.
It's a complex climate, and I mean both the warming planet and the geopolitical climate we're in. The world faces a new reality defined by less certainty, less predictability, a new world disorder, so to speak. And on the climate front, it is reversing some recent gains. The U.S. administration's retreat from green energy and the Paris climate deal, the trade wars fueling more U.S. oil and gas purchases, the actual physical wars reverberating around the world, and of course the breaching of the 1.5 degree global warming threshold.
Stacks on stacks on stacks of bad news coming from you. Not surprising.
Yeah, sorry about that. But there is a bright spot, though. I did, as you mentioned, I went to Ecosperity Week for some climate therapy and spoke to a few hopeful people. And, I got to say, maybe some of that hope and optimism might have rubbed off a bit.
So you were cornering these people while they were busy in their dialogues and you were chasing silver linings from them. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was doing. I mean, I did want their take on how climate investors and governments are navigating this geopolitically fractious landscape, right? And one of the optimists I caught up with was Dr. Steve Howard, the vice chairman of sustainability at Temasek, which is, of course, the organizer of Ecosperity Week that's held in Singapore every year. Have a listen. Dr. Steve, we are at a complex moment in the green transition with the U.S. retreat, carbon market setbacks, and climate change basically taking a backseat in several recent elections. What does the road to net zero need right now from investors and governments here?
Politics is messier now. But the positives on this, we can see incredible development with the solutions. And we can also see the engagement of the global business and finance community. And on the surface, maybe people aren't being as outspoken as they were everywhere on this. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the sort of, we talk to business leaders, the surveys of business leaders and finance leaders, people are determined to act. So most people have confirmed their long-term targets. They're confirmed they're still acting. They're still investing. They're maybe not just shouting in this uncertain political moment. They're not shouting about it from the rooftops quite as much.
So interesting to hear from Steve Howard there. But, Lee-Ling, climate investments are still just a fraction of private equity investing, right? Mm-hmm. We had a recent study by the publication New Private Markets, and it found that capital raised by funds with a partial climate focus exceeded $42 billion back in 2022. It hasn't been able to hit those levels since, and it's estimated that the figure fell 47% to just $22 billion in 2023, and that's declined again another 22% down to around $17 billion last year. So what's going on there, and what's holding investors back when we're talking about putting a climate focus on their investments?
I mean, going by those numbers you talked about is quite staggering. 47%, that's almost half the investment.
It is good math.
It's massive. Right. Thank you. My math is pretty awesome. And then, further 22%. So it is kind of alarming. And I did ask Steve Howard about, what's keeping investors from investing more. And he cites government policy and also technology risks.
It's always been this policy risk, and so that sounds really abstract. What's policy risk? But if you're looking at new technologies or even mature technologies like rolling out a solar plant, are the policies and planning and all of the regulations around that, are they clear and are they going to stay the same? Mm-hmm. Because if the policy changes, then that can make something that was a good investment a bad investment. And we've seen in different regions that policy risk is there. And then you've got some technology risk. Mm-hmm. That's for, I would say, sophisticated investors that are looking at new technologies. So these will be the things like I mentioned, like green steel or green cement, or even farther out things like fusion energy. Mm-hmm. They're this technology risk. But I think the policy risk is the big one because that shapes a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. But more and more governments realise that, and they're trying to sort of set set long-term targets and have clear policies that lead towards that.
Now, of course, I didn't get to attend Ecosperity with you, but I saw the theme was all systems go in Asia's race towards 2030. Cue the outer space
I know.
theme music.
Oh my goodness. I really, really tried very hard not to throw in space puns here and reserve it for our
Oh, you must have been
episode.
trying hard.
I was going to go with Houston, we have a problem.
That is your
But,
MO. I
Yeah.
know.
Me and the puns.
Post-production space music coming.
Absolutely.
So what does that mean, though? What does this all systems go in Asia's race towards 2030?
Well, it's basically the ticking climate clock, right? 2030 is a key deadline for a lot of the climate targets we're seeing by governments and corporations to do things like transition to cleaner energy, account for their emissions, offset carbon. And of course, a big one is a global target to triple renewable power capacity by 2030, which is just 5 years away. So, everywhere we're hearing about this race to net zero, this race to hitting these ambitious targets. What's needed is a sprint to get an edge in what's essentially a marathon. And by all systems go, it means that, the race is on, using all resources available. And Steve Howard, I asked him this, and he's pretty optimistic despite the odds.
The amount of human ingenuity, the investors looking at this, the businesses, the good people in government, the allies in civil society, there is a broad and deep movement around climate change. So let's not be despondent. And hope, ingenuity, innovation, these are also renewable resources. Political will is a renewable resource in this space. So I think if we overestimate what we can do in 1 year, but we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. And we've seen breathtaking changes in innovation. And so if we in 10, 15 years' time, EVs will be totally dominating. Renewables will totally dominate the energy system. We'll have solved storage issues within this. We'll have innovated in the food system. There'll be tremendous changes in the way we cool our buildings, etc. So this is the race of our lives, but it's a race, we're in it. And we need to be in it to win it.
So he says right there at the end, in it to win it. That to me seems like a very business-focused way of tackling this issue, the way investors think about trying to win. And they are having to think about that, how they can not only direct their money towards these planet-saving initiatives and technologies, but also considering their bottom line. This isn't philanthropy, by and large. Now, a lot of the investing that we've talked about so far is about mitigation, right? Slowing down global warming. We're not really on track with keeping the planet within 1.5 degrees, though. So what about building some resilience and the adaptation part of the equation? And often it seems that money is missing the mark when it comes to that.
I think for that part of the question, India's a pretty interesting case study. It's a huge country, right? Huge population, dozens of cities, thousands of towns, hundreds and thousands of villages in that one country alone. And the sheer size creates monumental challenges when it comes to building resilience. I spoke with the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, Dr. Arunabh Ghosh, who broke down a solution into 3 parts for us: mapping risks, investing in disaster, resilience, and focus on administrative capacity.
First, we've got to understand the nature of the challenge you're dealing with, which means that there has to be granular risk assessments of how climate change is impacting our economy, our people, our ecosystems. To do that, we at CEW have been developing the first high-resolution climate resilience atlas at a district and now at a sub-district level. This gives us an understanding of how floods, droughts, cyclones, sometimes a combination of these, are impacting in terms of the actual weather event, but then how it impacts the economic structure in a particular area. A particular area might be agricultural, which could be impacted in a certain way. Another area could be a very densely concentrated urban conglomeration, which will be impacted differently. The second thing that needs to happen is that this now needs to get converted into what is the financial solution to respond to this. Normally, what do countries do? There's a disaster happens, and then you pay out for the disaster mitigation or management, right? We have to invest in disaster resilience, right? And in order to do that, that risk mapping then should translate into insurance coverage, investment in the kind of infrastructure which is more climate resilient, which leverages nature-based solutions, which basically amortizes the costs of long-term climate resilience along the same length of time that the infrastructure lasts out. Right. And the third thing that needs to happen is you've got to build up the administrative capacity. A more advanced part of the economy or the country might have greater administrative capacity compared to somewhere else. Now, how do you build up that local capacity of administrators, of communities? Because they need to come together. They become the first lines of responders.
And then another interesting point that Dr. Ghosh made was that Asia can benefit more from learning from each other here, because the lessons that will be developed in Asia will be more relevant to us than something learned from other parts of the world that had the luxury of taking their time. And he says Asia is both out of time, but also impatient for a different way forward.
Yeah, no doubt Asia is really central to this story. Lots of work to do, and hopefully these types of discussions can generate less hot air and more actual progress. So putting on our running shoes, I guess, to take on that sprint towards 2030, the clock is ticking.
Indeed.
Okay, back to our quiz question. Li-Ling, what percentage of the world's coral reef ecosystems have been affected by an ongoing global coral bleaching event? Take a stab at it.
90%.
90%. I mean, you're pretty close. You're pretty close to the mark. I'll give you the points for it this week. It was 84%.
Oh.
So this event has stretched between January 2023 and April of this year. It's the most severe wave of ocean warming that's resulted in significant coral loss across dozens of countries. Essentially everywhere that coral exists, we're seeing bleaching. And there are lots of consequences. Sadly, not many solutions unless we actually mitigate global warming and fast. Nice job from you this week.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all for this episode of Climate Conversations. Thanks for joining us. Come connect with us on socials. We'd love to hear from you.
Catch you again next week. Bye for now. I'm Li-Ling Tan.
I'm Jack Board. Thanks as always to the team that put together this podcast. Sayer Win, Tiffany Ang, Janani Johari, and Crispina Robert.